Now, as you saw in Anna's piece, Reza Pahlavi, the Crown Prince of Iran, has many supporters, both in Iran and in the diaspora. But not everyone believes the Crown Prince is the best option for a free and democratic Iran. So to dig deeper into that question, we've invited once again Kaveh Shahrooz, who's a human rights lawyer and a senior fellow at the Macdonald Laurier Institute. Kaveh, good to see you.
Always good to be with you, Natasha.
Kaveh, you've taken a bold step here because not many have said this publicly, although they've said it privately. You've written a piece for the Globe and Mail, which has been entitled "Why We Should Be Leery of Reza Pahlavi as the Leader of Iran." And you're quite pointed in your critiques, but I'll invite you to share some of them here. Why are you concerned?
Sure. So what I argued in that piece is that it's difficult to disagree with the popularity that Reza Pahlavi is enjoying at the moment. There are people inside the country that are chanting his name. Outside the country, he's been able to mobilize hundreds of thousands of people to come out in the streets. All credit to him. And also credit to him in his public remarks. He speaks very eloquently about the need for democracy, the need for the ballot box, equality, rule of law, all the things that somebody like me, somebody who cares a lot about liberal democracy, would normally find, very intriguing and desiring to support. The problem, though, is when you contrast his words with the movement that he has built. So the movement that has coalesced around him, the movement that he has cultivated, is one that seems to espouse very different values than the one that he speaks about. So, just a few examples. One of the favorite chants at Reza Pahlavi's rallies calls for the death of leftists, for example. And this is not just some obscure chant. This is a favorite chant that is then echoed and amplified by Mr. Pahlavi's own wife. There are many, many similar types of statements where the movement is really nasty, really focused on excluding people from power rather than creating a broad tent to bring everybody together. On top of that, I am actually very suspicious of Mr. Pahlavi's own goals. I mean, he talks about the fact that he is nonpartisan, that he doesn't actually want power. But when you look at the blueprint that he's created of what will happen once the regime falls, he is granted basically dictatorial powers for about 2 years for him to kind of get Iran to a referendum. When you combine that with his interviews, primarily in Farsi, where he talks about the fact that he doesn't want to be a ceremonial king, you begin to suspect that perhaps what he wants to return to is what his father had in Iran before the 1979 revolution, which was an autocracy.
Okay, and in the piece, as you've pointed out here as well, when the Woman Life Freedom movement was happening, he was part of a group of Iranians in the diaspora that could rise up in terms of transitional leadership for the government. But what I noticed then, and what you've pointed out again a few years later, is that he removed himself from that process, and that many of the people who were part of that coalition came under extreme attack, sometimes from Reza Pahlavi's own supporters, that they perhaps were not as well suited as he was. So I would invite people to read this for further details. But the thing I also want to highlight here is that right now there is no alternative, Kaveh. So do you think it's appropriate, forgive me for using that word, to criticize Reza Pahlavi when the option is the regime or Reza?
No, I appreciate you asking that question. I think it's a very fair question. I disagree with the premise, though. I don't think the options are only the Islamic Republic or Reza Pahlavi. Precisely as you mentioned, during the Woman Life Freedom movement a few years ago, there was a coalition that came together. It was short-lived, but it was a coalition of Reza Pahlavi and a few others who did not see the world the same way Reza Pahlavi did. And that's actually true of the Iranian public, both inside the country and in the diaspora. I think a lot of Iranians have a lot of different views about what future Iran should look like, and there ought to be checks and balances in the opposition. So if this regime crumbles, I think Reza Pahlavi should certainly play a role, an important role, in its future, but he ought to be checked by others in his coalition who perhaps disagree with him. And I think that conflict is actually very healthy in ensuring that no person manages to amass so much power that they manage to replicate the dictatorship that is currently in power in Iran.
Have you put any of these concerns to members of his teams and those who support his leadership? And if so, what's been the response to you?
I have to admit, I have not been in contact with his team for a long time. I used to know his team quite well. And early on, shortly after the Woman Life Freedom movement, I stated some of these critiques about the way the issue was being handled, the attacks that were being launched against other very credible human rights activists and democracy activists, and they didn't seem receptive to it. I think their theory was that they wanted to create sort of two poles in the Iranian political system, either the regime or Reza Pahlavi, and they sort of didn't, in my view, they didn't seem to care how they went about it. So regrettably, I haven't been able to voice these critiques except in public fora, like in this interview or in newspaper articles.
So we've also spoken to a number of supporters of Reza Pahlavi who are part of the diaspora who also want a free and democratic Iran, and they've said that they want Reza Pahlavi to play a transitional role, that he doesn't necessarily want to be the leader. I mean, only time will tell what the reality is. But for people in your camp, Kaveh, who are perhaps a bit reluctant about leaning on Reza Pahlavi to be the solution, if this regime should fall, and right now there's no guarantee that that is what's going to happen, what would you like to see happen in terms of a transition to democracy?
So you're absolutely right. There is no guarantee at the moment that the regime will fall, but regimes like this tend to look invincible until they're no longer in power. They suddenly collapse. And if this regime was to collapse, what I'd want to see is, as I just mentioned, a coalition of leaders, including Reza Pahlavi, but there are also leaders inside the country that have different politics. They have different constituencies. There are Kurdish leaders and other ethnic groups. They all come together and they can actually map the path forward for us. I think that healthy competition in the leadership would actually be very good for establishing a liberal democracy.
Kaveh Shahrooz, always good to get your perspectives. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Natasha.